Talk.
Mr. Wood, carry on.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, if you look now, I've put the chart up here, but you've got it in your book. If you'll turn to the general fund, and you have a write-up of what it's used for. I also talked there about the 10 subsidiary funds and explained those and how they tie back into this at the end of the year.
I'm sorry, where we at now?
It's the tab is general fund.
Oh, yeah.
How far back is
About 3
it? There,
or 4.
I got, it's 110, I got that.
All right.
There it is, okay.
I don't intend to go through this whole thing here, but I wanted to point out 6 items to you. If you look at the property tax, that's 37.3%, sales tax is 12.2%. The health department is 3.9%. If you look on the far right column, okay, I'm getting these
Oh, yeah,
percentages
yeah.
from the far right column. Okay. Department of Social Services revenues are 9.8%, and transfers from other funds, which is on the next page, is 26.9%. When you add those up, that's 90.5% of the revenues. So that's where the real money is those. So let's go through those. The property taxes didn't grow but 0.7%. Sales taxes grew 1.25%. The health department is actually, let me get to that.
Plus 18%?
18.7.
Well, that was on the request, yeah, and that is what they got. So that's 18% more. That is revenues coming in from the state and their different fees and everything. Okay. And then on DSS, you'll see that's a big decrease. And the reason for that is that's a little misleading. As y'all know, during the year, they'll come back and the state releases more money to them. So you'll see that come in during the year on that. Let me explain the health department because it's not as big an increase as it sounds like. What you've done in the past on the health department is on the Medicaid. They true up at the end of the year. In the past, you haven't booked that as an estimated revenue till you got it. But we know we get it every year, so I went ahead and included that in there. So it's not really a big increase on that, okay? And I think that's pretty much what I wanted to go over there. The transfers from other funds are those transfers from those bigger ones. If you go to a few pages back, you'll see the narrative information on the revenue sources. I don't cover every revenue source, but I cover the major ones. So there's more detailed information in here about the property taxes and how we arrive at those estimations. Everybody see that? A couple pages back, right after that chart. Everybody
Going
see
back
it?
to what now?
Well, you've got about a 3-page chart,
Okay.
Forward in the,
and then
Forward.
right
Forward.
behind that is the revenue.
Revenues, okay.
Forward.
Okay.
Well, I'm lost.
It's not a chart.
Well, it's not a chart.
just 2 or 3 pages behind that.
There you go.
Further
There
on.
you go.
There you go.
So
Turn it up.
these narratives refer to this information in here as to why it's gone up or down and that sort of thing, okay? So you talk about the property taxes. I'm not gonna go into it here, but just, you might wanna read about why the vehicle property taxes are down. We've talked about that new collection system, that's in there. The sales taxes are in there. And then we go through all of the, major changes, okay? And that's where on the health department, I explained there's an $850,952 Medicaid cost settlement that typically hadn't done before. So those are the major comments about the revenues, okay? Now, if you'll go back to the chart, as we went over the revenues, expenditures and transfers, has everybody got that back on the chart? Expenditures. You can see on each one what percentage of the budget they are. You can also see what percentage their request was. And if you'll go to the bottom of the page, of the last page, you'll see that total uses of financial resources. The amended fiscal year 2014 budget is $151,690. Now that is the general fund plus all 10 subsidiary funds in there, okay? You'll see that the 15 budget is $136,058 is what they requested, and I'm recommending $135,951, $747. So the obvious question is, what's the difference between the $151,690 and the $135,951? So I'm gonna go over that with you very quickly, okay?
Can I ask a quick question here?
Yeah.
When we started with our budget for last year, what was our total budget for last year before all the budget amendments?
The original budget, we actually quoted it we quoted as a net budget, so I don't remember. This is actually presented in a different fashion, so I'd have to go back and look at it
okay.
in this same way because we presented it different last year.
And I have a note on that, I'm gonna get that.
Okay, you're gonna get that,
for you.
okay. Go ahead.
Let's just go down the list here. About the third one down is cable TV franchise. There's $4,468,388 that's not in this year's budget. And Pam's already explained to you, 2.4 million was appropriated this year, plus you took the 2 million for the Ag Center. So that's the 4.468 million there.
Did you
And
go back
also
to the
on that-
beginning of the chart?
Ed, I'm sorry. I'm at the
Second page
beginning
of
of
the
the chart, but I'm
chart.
on the second page.
Oh, yeah, I see it now.
Now I'm on expenditures,
All right,
okay?
In
That
July,
third
we'll
line-
do a budget amendment on that 2 million, reappropriating it, so we'll take it right back up to the 2 million.
Right.
Well, let me ask on this. At what point did the 2.4 transfer over?
That was early in the year.
Do we have a budget amendment on that?
I think so. I'd have to go back and look it up.
Okay.
All right. So there's 4.468 million of it, okay? If you look at facility services, probably about the 8th or 10th line down, everybody see that one?
Mm-hmm.
The difference there, I've done the math for you, that's about a $2,073,000 decrease. And the reason for that is y'all put a lot of money into facility services this past year, which you needed to do because you had a number of problems. We've still got a good amount of money in there, but we didn't need as much as you put in this year, okay? In the day reporting center, that's about a $86,000 decrease. Jail expenses, they've gone down about $218,000. Planning and inspections is down $210,000. Transportation, let's see, I'm on the next page there. There's about a $616,000 decrease there, and then you have, on the next transportation one, you have $256,000 less, and that was because of the Highway 70 and 1795, I believe those were studies or commitments you made there, which we won't have. Soil and water expenses are down 54,000. And then a very large one was economic development. That's down, I said 2.991, but it's not. It's down about 2.570.
What would account for that?
That's your 1.8 million from your eastern region as part of your economic development category.
Oh, okay.
See, you show it as a revenue coming in, but you show it as an expense going out
That was good.
with that budget amendment. Okay. Then you have Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. We know that's the Friends of Seymour Johnson. We know we took that up.
Excuse me, can we go back to that? But we've got an application still in to receive another, what, 2 million from?
These are loans. This is the initial 1.8 million that belonged to Wayne County.
Correct.
It was not a loan.
But it wasn't a loan.
Okay.
Okay, we're talking about cross.
So some of those may come in and be budget amendments after July 1, depending on when they come in.
That's right.
That's right.
Okay.
Well, that's right. They would be this year.
Yeah,
You're right.
they've gotta be this year.
Yeah, they'll be this year. Morton just reminded me, it's June 10th, they're closing out.
Mr. Daugherty, I wanted to tell you a little more information on the cable phone. We actually did a budget amendment moving 2.262 million to the radio project fund.
Right.
That's the budget amendment that went, that took those funds
The
down.
enhancement on the radio system.
Oh,
So
that's right. So we
that's
used
your
that.
decrease. You had the 2 million on the ag center and 2.262 on the radio system.
Okay, thank you. I'm an old man, bad memory.
Before we leave that, can I
Yes, sir.
ask the question? We have received our part of the cross allocation. Is that reflected on here? The initial,
The
Depends on-
576,000 is in.
576?
Yes, sir. We don't have the budget amendments for the next, the second application had 1 million on it, the third application had up to 1.5. Those are not, we have not done budget amendments for those
right,
yet.
but where's the 576? Is it included in this figure
Hang on just a minute.
that we're looking at?
Well, we had to put you to work.
I'm sorry, I just feel like I know where it's at. That's what we're starting on.
It was not, I think we had to have a cutoff date in it, when we were preparing these, spreadsheets, and it probably came immediately after the cutoff date.
Okay, but if it was to show up, it would show up under economic development?
It sure would.
That's right.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And so will the other two that closes on June 10th.
Okay, thank you.
Then on cooperative extension, you'll see that one's down about $369,000. Health department's down about $110,000. DSS expenses are down about 1.9 million. Now, that's not unusual, like I told you, because what happens there, there's not as much savings there as it looks like. What happens there is we go with what they initially say they're gonna give them, and remember, all throughout the year, you get all these, they've added this grant or this program or whatever, so that'll probably come back up. Okay. So decrease in transportation grants, here again, we'll get all of that, but that is the EdTap money, HCCBG, all of that is the money, a lot of the monies we get for the rural transportation system. But until we actually get them, then we do a budget amendment on that. Okay. There is an increase in the library. Most of these have been decreases. The library, of course, is going up. And that's because of the Mount Olive branch, obviously.
Could I ask you, what is other human
That's what I was
services?
gonna ask.
That would be some of your agency funds and all that.
What do you think?
Some of the dollars that you give to different agencies out there. We put them under other human services.
And we have that under one of these tabs, so
Okay.
we can get into that.
All right, all right.
Okay.
Let's see. Wayne Uplift Resource Association, 40,000. Nutrition for the Elderly, 65,000. Wayne Action Teams, 220,000. Wages, 5,000, 130 for project graduation. That's what those go are for. Okay? All right, so let's see, we're down to the library.
Excuse me, project graduation?
Project graduation.
I thought I heard that the school board eliminated that.
That's your communities and schools.
So it's
Communities and
community
schools. Yes.
So our project graduation is different than theirs, okay. Okay, thank you.
All right.
Two different.
All right, so then you have a $500,000, that's an increase in contingencies because you had none. And of course, that's for the bonuses. Okay. Increase in Board of Education current expenses is $131,734. That's, again, 1/4 of the $500 and something thousand that they had in fund balance. So we're just appropriating that out to them. Decrease in Board of Education capital outlay expenses of $535,365. There is an increase in county debt service, and the reason for that is that it's Eastern Region funds primarily. Okay. And then there's a decrease in transfers to other funds of $2,057,924. And then there's a decrease in transfers to the enterprise funds of $158,109. And that's primarily the transfer over to the EMS. So that's about, in rough numbers, 15,300 and something thousand of the 15,738,000. Some of them are just smaller numbers. I didn't go through every single one with you. But that's the bigger items of why it went down. Okay? And again, we can get into the details later at a work session if you want to, but I think those are the major points on there. The expenditures narrative, if you go back past the revenues, where I gave you the revenue narratives, then you have a detail, these are the itemization, the details of the revenues for the general fund behind it. Following that, and that's about 6 pages, then you'll have the expenditures. And here's where I talk about some of the major things regarding that, and I've just talked about some of them as we went through. And I don't know how much of this you want to go through in detail, or if you want to read through that, or go through it on a budget work session or what. Because this could take some time here, but I've given you about 6 or 8 pages there. It talks about the major changes within each department or sub-department of the general fund. Do you want to go through those, or you want to wait, or just get the highlights?
Yeah,
I think we ought to have a work session.
Yeah, we'll go on the work session.
Okay, all right. Well, then, that pretty much is the general fund. If you'll turn next to the first yellow tab, that's the court facilities fund.
There was only one question that in reading through this, Mr. Chairman, if I could.
Yes, sir.
Where do we stand on the Dewberry study?
We are in the process of getting that underway. I think Gordon had the latest on that. We had some issues with the contract. He and the engineer were going back and forth on the contract, I believe. We've gotten that resolved, and you sent it on to them, I believe.
Send it to Connie. I'll send it to you.
Okay, he sent, okay, so, our planning director has it, and he should be sending it back to Dewberry to get it signed, and then we're ready to get going.
Okay.
What kind of time frame is that study gonna take? I can't remember.
Basically, what it's gonna do is look at who has control of the utilities in what areas all along each one of the new interchanges, as I understand it, on these, on your, on 70, and was there another one? I think it was just 70, wasn't it?
Just the new seven.
So you've got, I think, what, 5 new interchanges, something like that?
Yeah, but we need to go ahead and get that started though,
Yeah.
because time's approaching.
Right.
It'll be happening before we know it.
Okay, so we've got that. On the court facilities fund, as I say in the write-up here, this is a subsidiary fund of the general fund. Under North Carolina statutes, the sheriff's responsible for providing court security, but the security is not budgeted in here. All this is to maintain the facilities. But I wanted to make you aware too, is that the county's responsible for providing adequate facilities to house it, includes the courtrooms, judge's office, district attorneys.
What's the
That's
yellow
first-
tab?
I'm on the first yellow tab.
Okay, I'm sorry.
The reason we did that is all of the white tabs are the general fund on the front part. Then these are the subsidiary general funds here in yellow. That'll go back into the general fund at the end of the year.
Yeah, quick question on that. I noticed that today when I came in the courthouse, we had 4 personnel there at the entrance, where we used to only have 2. We have now a bailiff or a deputy sheriff and 3 other private security.
Yeah.
Are all of those numbers necessary?
Yeah, we've actually had a part-time bailiff in there, but when they hold court, what Judge Jones actually wants is a bailiff in each courtroom. A full-time bailiff in each courtroom.
And full-time,
The security, yeah, because the security people are just checking people in and out of the building, is what they're doing. But in the courtroom, he wants a certified law enforcement officer in there. And you have district court and superior court,
but when we added the additional deputy downstairs
yeah,
at the entrance,
in the atrium, yeah.
we as a county are absorbing that cost, is that correct?
Yes, you're absorbing all of that.
I understand. Well, none of that can come out of the court, any of these court funds.
Well, I mean, you could put it there, but this is really just for facilities maintenance. Where we're showing those costs is in the sheriff's budget.
Okay.
All right. On the bailiffs, or in the sheriff's office, okay. All right, so on the courts, this is basically just to maintain the facilities, and you'll see we have about $159,000 there. That's really all that fund does. On the sales tax fund, just so everybody's clear, again, this is a subsidiary fund, and you have the 2 sales taxes that come in. Article 40, you have to set aside 30% of that as the county's portion used for school capital outlay or debt service. And so that's one of the revenues here. And then you have to set aside 60% of Article 42. And so we show those revenues coming in. And then the expenditures are for 2 line items. One is $2 million for minor capital projects, and that's part of what we give the school system, okay? And then the other is to pay for debt service due on any school construction, and that's $2,234,448. Now, what is not shown here yet is the debt service on Grantham and Spring Creek. But remember that what'll happen in this year's budget is once we do the bond, set up the bond and everything, we know what everything is, we'll come back and we'll adjust this for this much of a debt service payment, but as the revenue source, we will show money coming in from the schools out of that 2.2 million to offset that expense. Is everybody clear on that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The next fund is the Senior Citizens Fund. I go into a fairly good amount of detail here about where their money comes from. Basically, the majority of it comes from the Americans Act, which was enacted in 1965. So this is federal money that passes through the state, and then the state allocates it down to us. And they do it in different buckets for different programs. So that's how it's done, kind of like they do DSS and public health, all right? And of course, then we provide the services primarily through the Senior Citizen Center that we provide to do that. The main note there is, you'll see her budget's up. It's up by $158,000, but her costs really aren't up. Pam, I'm going to let you explain about the indirect cost allocation formula.
Right, if you remember, we put a budget amendment before y'all, increasing a transfer to the Senior Citizens Fund and increasing the indirect cost. The indirect cost went up because this facility is huger and it's requiring a lot more cost as far as maintenance and all from our other departments. But all that does is when you increase the indirect cost, then it goes back to the general fund as a contra account, reducing expenditures on that side since this is a subsidiary fund. So it's a wash. This time, we had to amend the budget in 13-14 to take care of this. This time it's in the original budget.
Right, and that's the primary difference. In terms of the cash, it's still there. This is just an internal accounting thing. And you say, well, why do you do it? Well, the reason you do it is to show that what the true cost is to run the senior center, when you figure in all the indirect costs and everything else. Okay. That's pretty much what I wanted to note there. One other thing I did want to note to you, though, is at the bottom of the first page, where it's on the write-up. Is everybody on that? It says this budget appropriates $223,000 of fund balance, similar to the $226,000 appropriated in fiscal year 14. Problem is, this fund balance will probably be spent. If so, we will have an issue in the 16 budget, as fund balance will not be available to appropriate at this level. So basically what I'm saying is, we do have an issue with this fund going forward in future years. And so we're gonna have to look at what do we do. You probably increase the transfer over from the general fund, and/or you may have to look at cutting back services. Not in the 15 year, but in 16. So I'm trying to take a look ahead, and I'm giving you a look ahead to say, look, and if you go back to the chart that we talked about where you start on fund balances, take a look at that chart and you'll see what I'm talking about. This fund balance is going down each year. Okay.
So I could elaborate on that a bit. You're just saying that you're kind of giving us a heads up.
That's correct.
That the senior center is basically about $225,000 less dipping into their reserves, and sooner or later they're gonna run out of.
That's right.
And how are you gonna sustain this?
That's right.
So hopefully the senior center would look at that.
Right.
And would find some ways to hopefully bring in some donations or something to offset some of these
Right.
costs.
Yeah.
Because we
And-
certainly don't wanna cut services,
No.
but
But
it's
I-
gotta sustain itself.
That's right, and that's what I wanted to make you aware. You know, there's, you know, we want to look at, as you said, first of all, how can we economize? And then secondly, what's our alternatives on it? But I wanted to give you, whenever I see something like this coming, I want to give you a heads up a year in advance that we've got that issue.
Question just to follow up.
Mr. Pate,
Is that because of the new facility cost will run? Is that why the fund balance is coming down?
Yeah,
Is that where it's coming from, over a period of time?
Yeah, that's some of it, because with this one, you're running it, and I believe it was on the new building, if I'm not mistaken. But
That
anyway,
makes sense,
we'll,
huh?
you know, we'll look at that going forward.
Mr. Mayor.
was part of this, also, I know that there was been a marked increase in the number of meals that have been prepared versus when it was at the old senior center.
That may be part of it, because your participation rate has tripled in this, since this new facility. I mean, it's been a success story. So you really can take a lot of pride in that. You've got probably one of the finest senior centers around, and the programming is excellent. Aaron does an excellent job, but some of this is the growth in the programming.
And the cost of transportation went up too.
Yeah, we got some of that, and so hopefully we can get a better handle on some of that as well, and may help with some of it. So, but anyway, I just want to give you a heads up that that's one of them we see an issue with. Okay. The 4-H fund, as I say here, this does not cover the cooperative extension salaries and everything. All this is there are various programs under cooperative extension that deal specifically with the 4-H groups, you know, the various programs they have. I'm not gonna go into great detail here because each sub-budget in here is for a specific program. And then if you have any questions on any of those, we'd be happy to, have Kevin Johnson come in and give you an overview on each program. All right? The next thing is WCC fund. That is Wayne Community College. I've given you quite a bit of information here on how community colleges are structured in North Carolina. The long and short of it is that, I guess the quick and dirty way of looking at it is, the state is supposed to provide the faculty and, all of that. You are to provide the facilities, insurance, utilities, basically all the operating expenses and the facilities are on the county that hosts the college, okay? So that's what we've got there. The one thing under the notes section I wanted to stress is the proposed budget is $448,000 less than the amended budget. However, that's misleading as the amendment appropriated $482,000 that will not be appropriated this year. So basically, it was really about a flat budget. And so, if you take that out, they're asking for $33,999 more, which is a 0.9% increase in operating costs. I just wanted to highlight this note for you. It needs to be noted that this budget does not include additional operating expenses for a proposed advanced manufacturing center. Those are estimated at about $271,000, so if we go forward with that project, then we would need to amend this budget to include that. And I could have done it either way, but at the time we were doing this budget, I didn't know whether we would go forward with that or not. So this was the safest way to do it. So we can either pass the budget as I've proposed it to you on this particular thing and then do a budget amendment, or you could add it in on the front end. I'd recommend you just adopt the budget with the understanding that if you go forward with it, then we would add an amount for the operating expenses. And the operating expenses may not be the 271. We've talked about a few things where we thought we might be able to cut that back some.
That's correct.
Okay.
But, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Darby.
if I could ask though, in that 271, if we adopt that,
Yeah.
then actually that would come from fund balance.
Yes. Yeah, you can use, if they have some fund balance, we can use that first. But if not, then
I don't think they have a whole lot of fund balance. It would actually come from, we would have to
I was
appropriate
gonna
from
say,
our.
and then if they don't, then we would have to use it out of the general fund balance, because it is a general fund related item.
We
Blanket
we
bill.
actually send them all their budgeted operating expenditures every year. So, and the fund balance that is left in this fund is totally restricted, and they normally do a budget amendment in the month of July, asking for the amount that was remaining in the prior year to
So
move
in
it
that
forward.
case, it would come from our general fund then,
It would be a transfer
totally.
using fund balance.
Okay.
Well, let me elaborate a little bit on that, because just in a nutshell, I thought our obligations here would be to fund the buildings themselves, but the operating expenses are to be borne by the state. No,
No, what's borne by the state is the faculty. If you read this
so
upper
the
portion.
faculty, not the actual operating.
Correct.
That's right.
You have to pay the utilities, the upkeep, the janitorial, upkeep. They even make you pay for their lawyers. I don't know why, but that's in the statute.
Yeah.
That's lawyers wrote the statute.
Good point. And he worked for the community college, no doubt. But if you read here, the third paragraph, Joe, funding for the community college system is split by law between the state of North Carolina and its counties. The state is responsible for the current operating expenses, salaries, admin, instructional services, support services, furniture, equipment, and library books. Counties must pay all costs, next paragraph, must pay all costs for maintenance and repairs to buildings and equipment, rent, utilities, custodial services, insurance, legal fees. Also, any land and building costs not provided by the state, and all vehicle purchases and maintenance, as well as grounds maintenance, must be paid by the county. And then I'll give you the state statute, you know, if anybody wants to read that. Okay? And then the next paragraph kind of nails it on buildings. It says, "It's been many years since the state's approved a bond issue for the construction or renovation of buildings. Every now and then you can get one in on a state appropriation, but generally the trend is that counties provide the physical facilities. And given the state's recent financial condition, that trend's likely to continue." So that lays it out,
That
for you, and
clarifies.
that's by law, so, you know, we're stuck with, those particular obligations, okay?
And you'll see a budget amendment coming from the community college in July. They always do it every July. We're appropriating the funds for capital projects that they have not completed the prior year.
Okay, everybody clear on that? The next one is the revaluation fund. Of course, this is the property tax revaluation fund, and you may ask why that's separate. The reason is that actually state law says it needs to be separate. But essentially, you're supposed to put aside about 1/8 of the cost of doing a revaluation every year, because revaluations, as y'all know, are done every 8 years. And so, that was the plan you had developed, and we're simply following that cost. So it's virtually the same numbers as last year. About 40,000 of the expenses, as I said there, those are professional services, because if we need an outside appraiser during the current year, then we pay for it out of here. And you may say, well, how does that happen? Well, when you get a new property, we have to go out and do the initial appraisal on it. And typically, we get assistance with the commercial appraisals. Okay. All right, the next one is DSS, the Public Assistance Fund. I think the best way I can explain a DSS budget to you is think of it as about 50 separate programs. And for those of you who are on the DSS board, I think you know what I'm talking about. The problem you have, and the health department's kind of the same way. Each one of them has their own separate eligibility criteria. So before DSS services are provided, we have to go through and do income verifications, eligibility, other eligibility criteria to see if somebody, what they qualify for in terms of these multiple programs. And why that's critical is because if we mess up, the state may have to reimburse that money to the feds, and of course, if they have to reimburse that, they're coming back to the county. So one of the most critical things in running a DSS department is making sure you have good income verification criteria and that sort of thing, and that you're doing the background, because if you overpay them, or if you give people benefits to which they were not legally entitled, then we're subject to having to reimburse that. So that's one of the most critical aspects of it. But I wanted you to be aware of that, and like I said, as you go through their budget, if you look at the various subcategories within that budget, I've lost count, but it's somewhere around 50 separate sections in there, and each one is its own program. So again, if you have any questions on any of those, we'll be happy to have Debbie Jones come in and go over any of that with you that you want. And I've tried to give you the statutes that it falls under. So, does anybody have any questions on that? On the Public Health Fund, pretty much the same thing. I've given you the statutes that it operates under. Tried to give you the 10 items that Health Department shall ensure that the following 10 essential public health services are available. That's in their charge under state law. And I've given you the statutes on that. They're regulated by primarily by three agencies: the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Public Health, the North Carolina Department of Environment and Natural Resources, Division of Environmental Health. That's primarily for the sanitarians, you know, doing the septic tank evaluations on. And also the North Carolina Commission for Health Services. Again, I've got a few notes in there. You might want to take a look at those. I think everything's pretty much in order there.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Dillon.
I do have one matter what's on my mind if we could check into, and that is, and board may need to check into this. Evidently at the health department, the state withholds 10% of their Medicaid funds for them to audit. And then they're supposed to pay that to the county. And I believe, if I'm correct, we're going either on the third or fourth year of them holding back 10%, and none of those funds have been paid back to us. Is anybody aware of any of that problem? I mean, there's a lot of money that they're holding
There is
back.
a lot of money.
And I think they were waiting for an audit to make sure that
Well,
they
there-
weren't overpaid or underpaid.
Yeah, there's been a state audit of, there's been a federal audit of state Medicaid. The feds have been on the state of North Carolina for several years.
Right.
About how they've run their Medicaid program. So that may be why they're holding that up until they determine what the extent of that is. But
I
I'm
think
not,
it's going on the fourth year, and there's a lot of money that's our dollars that they're holding.
Pam, can you make a note of that and,
Yes, sir.
and board, and we'll take a look at it.
The question to Paul, does that impact DSS as well? On their Medicaid funds?
It would.
Okay.
But they
I would think
don't,
so.
they don't hold DSS funds back.
Okay.
I don't think, they are reimbursed.
Okay. I was just curious.
Didn't you
I
say,
hadn't heard that, so I'll be sure.
didn't you say earlier when you were talking about revenues that you were anticipating the money in the health
We're actually
department?
we get some payment every year.
And
it's
that's
the
a cost settlement.
That's the Medicaid cost settlement, so that's why I'm a little,
You would check.
we're gonna look into that and see what we get. We may get some of it and they still hold some of it, you know, we just gotta see what they do. Okay. The next item is the Wayne County Schools, and this is the current expense fund. Again, they requested the same amount this year. We gave them that same amount. Where you had earmarked it before, we earmarked it the same way. The one thing that was added was the $131,734, and again, that's the 1/4 of the 500 and something thousand that had built up in that fund balance. Okay?
Have you got a copy of their budget and audit yet?
I think we have the audit. I only have about a 2 or 3 page budget. I requested the more detailed one from Dr. Taylor last week.
Okay.
So, so we should have that shortly.
And the reason I asked that question, I mean, 2 pages here.
Yeah,
I mean,
it really is just 2 line items. In the budget I do that I did in Lincoln County, it was just part of the general fund. We just had 2 line items,
okay.
capital and operating. It's a lot of money, but it really is just 2 line items. I will say that I did look at how you compare on operating capital compared to other school districts. So they're not out of line with their request at all. I can tell you that.
Well, good.
Okay, Wayne County Schools, capital funds, this is the $2 million that you give them every year. And they requested the same amount. And as I said here, I guess the best way to look at the capital outlay is, again, by state law, counties are responsible for the facilities, to build them. You're not responsible for maintaining their facilities. Well, technically you are in terms of major renovation, but you don't pay the janitors and all that like you do at the community colleges. But, so the way to look at this is you do the large projects like building 2 new schools or $10.3 million worth of major renovations like you've approved. Those you typically go out and borrow money for 20 years to do. This is $2 million annually, which on all of their facilities, you're doing minor capital outlay with, is what this is for. Okay. And so that amount has stayed the same. Does anybody have any questions on that?
The school, in my understanding that the school board has to keep that money separate, it's just for,
Capital outlay.
yeah.
Pam, you wanna go into that on how we do the?
On the 2
separating-
million, we actually reimburse the schools for their expenditures. We don't send them a 1/12 monthly appropriation. They send us the bills and we pay from the actual invoices back to the school system. So we're reimbursing them. So that's how you have fund balance in that
Okay,
fund.
so what happens if they don't use the full 2 million?
It stays restricted in that fund and they can reappropriate it the next year.
Okay,
That's why we keep it as a separate fund. And when it subsumes into the general fund on your audit, you'll see restricted for schools, or restricted for education, it'll be in there. Okay.
we can find out what's in that balance, can we not?
Yes.
Yeah, we
That's
have,
Well, And
we
it
have-
was actually listed on that summary chart.
Oh,
as of
okay.
So we can go back and show you that.
I'll look it up, I'll just make a note
Okay.
here.
All right. The next one is the E911 fund. And as I told you, the fundamental change this year is we used to have two 911 funds. One was the operating money that paid the salaries and everything. We have simply made that a part of the general fund, so you don't see that. Okay, that fund no longer exists, or will no longer exist in this budget. This one, you do need to keep this money separate, because this is the 60 cent that everybody pays on their telephone bill. The state collects that. I've given you that background here. They changed that law in 2007. It used to be a county fee. The state took it over and centralized the collection of that money, and now they give you a state appropriation every year. So they basically took control of what used to be a county revenue source, and now they're starting to dictate to us exactly how we're supposed to do it. Is that a fair way of putting it? I've given you the statute, 62A-46C. You hear us talk about what these funds are limited for. I've given you a synopsis of what it's limited for there. So you can see in there, there's no salaries or anything like that. They will pay for some training, but primarily, it's for the equipment within the 911 center. And that's why you have built up such a large fund balance in there, because for a while, they were giving you more money than it took to operate it. Now, we are doing some capital outlay for some of that equipment, and so you'll see some of that fund balance being used down when you go to the chart. The summary chart on fund balance is in front of the budget. But that lays out how it's used, what the regulations are, and that sort of thing. And again, we could go into more detail. I've laid out there about one increase for a CAD GIS technician, and I am recommending approval of that. One bit of good news we got on the next page is non-capital computer equipment. We were originally thinking that the radio system, we need to go to encryption on our radio system. And I believe we talked about that, or have we?
Right.
We did on from the safety standpoint?
Yes.
We originally thought we were gonna have to eat all of that cost out of basically the general fund money. We recently got word, like within the last 2 or 3 weeks, that the state board, 911 board, had approved $68,000 to upgrade our console radio system for encryption in the 911 center. So that has saved us $68,000 in our general fund from where we thought we were going to be with that.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Garden.
Is it my understanding then that that request that the sheriff had requested encryption is taken care of by this?
No, that's the part, as I say down here, we'll have to still pay for his portion. What we don't have to pay for is Mel originally had in his other E911 request for his operating under capital there, this 68,000. So it's not coming out of the sheriff's portion, but it is a reduction out of the 911 center budget in the general fund
So we are still going to have to encrypt the radios themselves
for the sheriff.
for the sheriff.
That's correct. That's correct. But it cut this cost significantly from where we thought we were.
Not only the sheriff's department, but all law enforcement.
That's right. That's right.
But we're not paying for theirs now, the others.
Well, no, it was 134,000 originally we were gonna pay out of county funds. This just cut that by 68,000. So it's cut it almost, well, it is almost in half.
Yeah.
Okay, the next one is the fire district's fund. What, we've started out giving you, the background on that, the legal status, what law affects that. And then on the, I explained to you how we do ISO ratings in North Carolina. They're a little bit different from the way we do them nationally. They're based on the ISO, the national ISO standards, but they're actually done by the Office of the State Fire Marshal in North Carolina. The next page is the requested tax rates. Pretty much they're the same as the current year. The one exception was with Pate Town. I know several of you have been in discussion with them, and we think that rate will be modified. But they have gone from 5%, they're requesting 8 cents. And what we're doing from the county standpoint is we're gonna take the two departments that made that up and then reduce that down. No, I'm sorry, I'm getting confused with one of them. This is Pate Town. They've requested a full-time person. I've looked at that, and given their call volume, which is about 107 call-outs for the year, we're recommending that you not approve that. So I'm recommending, if you see the write-up, if you go back to the previous page, at the bottom of the write-up, you'll see the last sentence, or last two sentences. In my opinion, an average call response of 1 every 3 days does not warrant the cost of a paid firefighter, and so I recommend you deny the request. They only had 107 calls all year. If you divide that by 365, divide that in 365 days, you know, it's 1 every 3 days.
And when we do go into closed session, I mean, not closed session, but into work session, we'll probably go over most of these.
Yeah.
And we can discuss at that time, you know, personally, I'm not against an increase for them, but let's be realistic about it.
Right.
And you were analyzing New Hope.
Yeah, that was the one I got a little confused on. New Hope, you remember, combined two departments. What we're looking at there is basically if you gave them the same amount of money, if you took the money that each of the two departments got last year, because, you know, they had different rates. One was at 6 and one was at 8 cents. And so if you take the same amount of money and then that it's to generate, and you add up the two assessed valuations of the districts, we can back into a blended tax rate that would hold them equal. And I think Pam and Janice are in the process of working those numbers out.
Okay. And we don't have that situation with Northeast Wayne, which is the new department, which is the combination of Fayette and Eureka, because both their tax rates was already at 8 cents anyhow.
Right.
So that's a washout.
That's a wash there. So then what you have for each one, and they're not in I want to stress that they're not in alphabetical order, which threw me a little bit at first, but basically I guess it's how they were initially entered into the system. So they are in the order of the account number assigned to them. But what you have under each one is you have revenues, expenditures, and then you have a chart. And now in Wayland, The first one out the chute is a little unusual because Wayland is covered by Mount Olive by contract. So what I've given you is the volume per response for Mount Olive, but it doesn't necessarily break out Wayland. It just, it has the whole thing, Mount Olive included. But let's take the next one, Antioch. You have the revenues, expenditures, and then you have the chart from the Fire Marshal's office that shows a breakdown of the calls that they responded to, the types of calls, and that sort of thing. You have that for each one of these. And on some of them, you will see that, for instance, where we combine two into a new one, you'll have the new fire department budget request, but you'll have the response calls from both those old departments, okay? Does anybody have any questions on the fire district's fund? Okay. The next one is the Emergency Medical Services Fund. This is our EMS system, and that's part of what we were talking about before. It's set up as an enterprise fund, so you have the revenues, and if you go to the revenues, you'll see that the way this thing is funded is it's $540,000 of EMS federal Medicaid, users fees of $3,038,000, transfers from 110, and 110 is the general fund. So that's the $2,338,700. If you go back to the general fund, if you remember under their expenditures and transfers, you'll see that $2,338,700 being transferred out of the general fund over to here. Okay?
Quick question.
Yes.
User fees, MS, Besco, we have some special contract with them. Is that broken out in a different line for some reason?
I don't know why they did that. We're not breaking it out this year. I have no,
Just caught my eye.
yeah,
Is that just a one,
I can't answer that.
the Busco? I think that was a one-time
User
deal.
fees, EMS, Besco, $2,400.
Well, they probably just didn't have
It's
it
not.
this year.
Joe's saying it's
If
been
they'd done
contracted
Busco
services
fees,
in the
that's right.
past
Okay.
Isn't that right?
to cover events out there, and they would pay us for it.
I was just curious. Thank you.
Okay. So that's basically how it's funded, and that's part of what we talked about before. And then, of course, you have the expenditures, and they match up. Okay. So does anybody have any questions on EMS? If not, we'll go to solid waste. Of course, you set this up as an enterprise fund. We've got, I've listed for you in the write-up, we've got 13 convenience sites. One of them is at the landfill, so you've got 12 others scattered throughout the county. They take household garbage. We also have recycling there. One thing I wanted to stress to you is you are in excellent shape from a landfill perspective. Most counties have a horrific time trying to site a landfill or trying to expand one. This county's in excellent shape. We have 1,000 acres out there. You've done 2 sales so far, so you've used 60, or 3, you've done 66 acres. 2 of them have been closed, you're on the 3rd one. It's a 22-acre landfill sale. So I think you can see that at this rate, you've got a tremendous amount of capacity for years ahead. So why that's important, obviously, is that the problem, you've taken care of the problem on the front end very well. It'll go for a long time, and just as industry's looking to move in, look at your water and sewer capacities and things like that, to a lot of them, this is critically important as well if they have a considerable amount of waste, because some counties have a problem dealing with it, and are actually having to ship it to other counties or things like that. So I just wanted to stress to you, you're in great shape in terms of the capacity of the landfill. Does anybody have any questions on this? The The capital outlay is for major equipment there. I've listed for you what the capital outlay is for under the notes. That is a used motor grader. A regular one would have been about $400,000. Then you gotta do some rotation replacement of some of the compactor boxes every year. There's also a rotation replacement of a roll-off truck. Those are the, of course, the large trucks that take those big roll-off containers and bring them in from the convenience sites all over the county.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Kamara.
what, did you say we had 1,000 acres
Yes,
out there?
yes.
That is good.
So we're in good shape.
I just wanted to.
Yeah, we're in good shape. Okay, anybody have any questions on the landfill operation? All right, the next one is the sewer fund. And this is the one we've had quite a bit of discussion on, but I want to go through more of the details on this one with you because of the issues we've got. You've got a very small sewer system. You know, this, and we have no treatment capacity. We send ours to Goldsboro and it's treated there. So that is the system. The only other thing we have that I'm aware of is that we have a small line that takes care of the airport, and that's tied into Fremont's system.
That's right.
Isn't that right, Wayne? I mean,
Yes,
right.
yes, sir.
Okay. But, so what we're primarily talking about here, though, is the operation of the Genoa line. So this fund's used to account for the activities of that sewer system. You have about 13,000 linear feet of gravity sewer lines and over 26,400 linear feet of force main lines with 4 sewer pump stations. That's the whole system. So it's not a very big system at all. We have about 197 customers in the Southern Wayne Sanitary District, and the rest are in the Wayne County Water District. So they're served by 2 different water districts. The sewage collected flows to the city of Goldsboro's wastewater treatment plant where it's treated before release. The county's entered into contracts and purchased capacity in Goldsboro's wastewater treatment plant on 3 separate occasions. The first, this is what Milford and I have been able to find on it. The first was for 400,000. I put 400,000 and then spelled thousand. It's just 400,000 gallons per day. That's my error. 400,000 gallons per day in July of 2000. In the second agreement in July of 2002, the county paid $678,000 and the rate was dropped to $341 per cubic foot. We think why we paid that was they had to make some improvements to their plant. So rather than raise the rates, you made a capital contribution there, and they took the rates down. And they measure things in cubic feet. Most people do it, you can do it either way with your meters, but just for your information, a cubic foot is equal to 7.48 gallons, okay? And so in the agreement, the conversion is cubic foot is equal to 7.5 gallons. And the reason that's important is we do our billing in gallons, so you have to make these conversions to make it work. There's no additional, in the agreement, the conversion, yeah, we'll put that, there's no additional capacity allocated. In the third agreement in 2004, the county paid $169,500 and the rate was dropped to $339 per cubic foot. And the rate has remained at that level. The county's average daily use is about 225,000 gallons per day of the allocated capacity of 400,000 gallons per day. We cannot exceed the 400,000 gallon per day limit by more than 10%, or the rate doubles for that capacity use. So we're basically using 56.25% of our allocated capacity. Is everybody clear on that?
If I could inquire. The schools are actually on our sewer, is that correct? Or not?
Some of them are, I think.
Well, let's take Spring Creek High School. That one is. But actually it flows into the sanitary district's line, which connects to the county sewer. Is that correct?
Yeah, some of this stuff is convoluted, I can tell you.
Well,
We've
that
got,
sounds mighty convoluted to me.
well, we're gonna have some discussions with some of the sanitary districts about, trying to get clear who owns what and what flows into what and all of that, because it's a little bit of a spaghetti
Well,
thing right now.
from my understanding, the sanitary district is charging the school board for the sewer for Spring Creek High. Let me just,
I can't answer that, I don't know.
We're gonna look at all those things.
okay, we'll let you look into it.
Okay. But if you know of any unique situations like that, I need to hear about them. Because that, if they are a customer of theirs, that makes sense, but then the question is, what are we getting?
And then there's one other issue that we found, and that is that these meters that are malfunctioning, and the city of Goldsboro is charging based upon these inaccurate meter readings.
That's part of what Milford's going through now.
Okay.
That's part of what we're trying to get
So you are
addressed.
examining those.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Another issue also is some sanitary districts is charging impact fees, but the majority do not.
That's correct. That's
Okay.
correct. And they are free to set their own fees. So, but you're exactly right.
But if they're charging I'm sorry, I know I should leave this alone, but.
No, it's
If
an
in
issue
fact-
that we've got to address at some point.
If the sanitary district is charging for the sewer and it's dumping into the county sewer system, do we charge the sanitary district?
That's where I've got to track through everything. But I think what you're gonna find is that we deduct that amount from ours and that they pay part for Goldsboro. They pay their part to Goldsboro and we pay the other. But we're gonna check all that out.
But that's part of what this Dewberry report's supposed to do, right?
Right.
That's why we need it, so we can find out exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
Well, it's just hard for me to understand where we're generating 225,000 gallons per day. Where's that coming from?
Well,
A
you've
lot of it's
got,
rainwater.
yeah, a lot of it's rainwater, but you've also got, quite a bit of commercial area there.
Georgia Pacific's on it.
Yeah, so you know, I mean, we can go through and show you the customer list, but you've got quite a few customers on there.
Okay.
The
But as-
majority, it is commercial in it.
Yeah. So when you look at this,
And the landfills.
yes, with the leachate collection there. Currently, the county's experiencing a severe case of infiltration and inflow into the system. Given the age and condition of the system and the fact that this has been one of the wettest winters and springs in many years. Infiltration occurs when the sewer pipes are cracked or unsealed and the moisture in soil seeps into the system. Inflow occurs when manholes, which have holes in the top of it to release sewer gases, are in low areas that are subject to flooding. So as it says, it flows in to your system through there. In particularly hard rain events, this inflow can be substantial. The estimated additional cost for the current level of I&I is roughly $210,000. The facility manager has a smoke testing company identifying the major deficiencies, and we will address them as soon as possible. And he has already made some repairs on some major lines already, which has helped. Based on preliminary findings, we believe the problems are extensive, particularly since some of the system is terracotta piping, and we have confirmed some sections have collapsed. This budget assumes that the repair work can be finished by the end of December, cutting the cost of treatment of Goldsboro's wastewater treatment plant by $105,000 in the second half of the fiscal year, and about $210,000 in future years. This savings will be used to pay the debt service. So what I'm saying to you is we feel like that by the end of December, we can have recovered, have fixed this I&I problem. So we're gonna pay for it for about a half a year as we're making the corrections. But by the end of December, our plan is everything would be fixed. At that point, we should be able to cut it in half for the rest of the year. That's if everything goes according to plan, but I wanted you to understand where we're at. So we won't get the full benefit of the repairs in fiscal year 15, but we will in 16. We'll have a full year's savings at that point. So,
I have, Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Mayor.
that area, where we're having sewer issues, ours is is that a force main?
well, you've got some gravity and some force main. Most of the problems is gonna be in the gravity, because the
Okay.
force main is under pressure. So if you
Yeah.
had problems there, you would be blowing it up.
Okay, so a lot of
Or
it's,
you'd be losing the pressure.
yeah, a lot of it's coming from possibly the businesses that use gravity feed into our force main. Is that right?
I gotta check with Milford on that. The
Okay.
only way you can do
It's-
that is to manifold it in. I do know that. So
Yeah,
we
it's
gotta look
it's
at
similar to what we got in the northern part of the county. Right
Okay.
now, we've figured out that the jet port so far doesn't have very little I&I. We have figured out since we put the sewer meter in, it's only been
Yeah.
up for a week, but
Right.
just as a preliminary. But North Wayne, Northeast, and CB Aycott are in the Fremont gravity feed system. And so according to, who's responsible for the gravity feed from schools through the main force line? That's
Yeah.
what everybody's looking into.
Yeah, that's the issue for them up there.
That's correct.
That's not on our system, but that is the issue.
That is, but we're talking about similar situation, except we are responsible for the gravity feed lines to those businesses, like Food Line and those places. Is that correct?
Once they leave their property.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Kamara.
Mr. Manager, I'll ask a question, go back a little bit to, the schools, talking about the schools in the Grantham School and the sewer, and if we had to pipe it, if we were piping it versus a septic system,
Right.
would we be talking about going to Genoa doing something, or going straight to Goldsboro doing something?
Well, that's part of what the engineer's gonna tell us,
Where it would be,
which is the most economical way to go. The most economical way to go would be a septic tank, obviously. So what we gotta look at is what we can do there. But that's what the engineer's being paid for. And then, of course, whatever the optimum, result is, then we would pay them to make the design for it, bid it out, get it constructed, and then we're there.
I know the related question I wanted to ask, if it turned out that it was a pipe system, would that be a system that could be tapped onto in other, and I'm just thinking about
Well,
housing developments and so forth and so on.
I can't answer that yet, Ed, because he would have to design the system, and then we'd find out how much would be gravity and how much would be force main. You typically can't tap a force main. If it's a large enough customer, you may let them do that, but they have to, it's called manifolding in, and what they have to do is, a force main is under pressure.
Mhm.
So you can't tap it with a normal tap, because it's gonna back up on it.
Right,
And so what he's gotta do is he's basically gotta have a similar, pump that will match yours, and they manifold in and both flow
Gotcha.
through the system. If one is higher than the other, somebody's gonna have a big problem.
Right.
And so, you don't typically wanna do a whole lot of manifolding on that system either.
But, and I know this is really projecting and trying to guess down the road, but for the benefit of the entire area, say Grantham and everything coming back, possible housing development, all that,
Right.
somewhere down the road,
Well, when we do the study, I mean, we'll take all of that into account. In other words, his initial thing is gonna be what's it gonna cost to get the sewer to the schools? But you can look at also as part of that is what's the drainage basin? Because the drainage basin is the gravity flow catchment area you could get for what you're talking about. Does that make sense?
yes, sir, oh, yeah.
Okay. So that's basically where we're at on the I&I. Again, on this, as I said earlier, I can't say that we will have a rate increase or won't. We just need to see how this plays out. And a lot of that's gonna be determined too by how long we can spread this cost out on the debt service. And obviously, we're gonna try to spread it out just as long as we can and keep the rates as low as possible. Okay. That's the sewer fund. The next one is the Wayne Net Fund. In the parentheses, NEMT is non-emergency medical transport. So I like to put that in there to differentiate that from the EMS system, which of course is emergency medical transport. This is non-emergency medical transport. Okay.
Let's clarify one thing right from the beginning, though. Wayne Net is our backup for EMS.
Yes, yes, and they're using, used ambulances primarily there. And, as the chairman just said, is in the second paragraph, currently all net trucks are staffed with EMT basics. When a transport comes in that requires a paramedic, then the EMS side is contacted for this. And what happens then is if we have to take that paramedic unit to handle this transport, then they're short. So what they're proposing is, and that happens, as I said, about 22 times per month. So what the director's asking for is to upgrade 3 EMT positions to paramedics. And that's a fairly inexpensive fix for it. You're not talking about 3 new people, you're just talking about upgrading the level of their certifications from EMT basic to paramedic. And so we've included that in there, and what that will really improve is the safety on our EMS program, our EMS side, because you won't have to be taking a paramedic unit out of service to do a transport. Okay.
Let me, Mr. Chairman, let me get a little education inside of my head here. So this is non-emergency, Ellsworth Hall, who are they, tell me again who they're hauling.
Joe, you can handle that.
This is dialysis patients, maybe from the residence to facility, facility transports from rest homes to the hospital. And then there's out-of-town trips that we may take them from Wayne Memorial to Vida or to Rex or Wayne Med, any of the out-of-town locations that we may travel to.
Wheelchair.
Wheelchair in addition to that too.
So they need to be under medical care, but it's not, you know, where we're rushing them to a hospital or anything.
And this is on a per trip, per mile, per what?
Yeah,
How does it?
It's whatever the trip charge is based on the type of call, whether it's basic or advanced life support. And then in addition to that, we charge $8.50 per loaded mile, and that is reimbursable, all $8.50 of that
From Medicaid.
for Medicaid.
Medicaid.
It's $8,
And 50
Per-
cent per
per
loaded
mile.
mile. Loaded mile,
meaning that you got somebody on there
That's
and the
correct.
vehicle is loaded.
right.
So it's one way.
One way, you don't charge the person to come to the house, it's only once they get you,
No.
once you get in.
Right.
Like if he was transporting from our local hospital to Rex or Vidant, and the person was staying, it would be only the mileage to get there.
All the mile it takes to get them.
Not coming by.
And also insurance in place,
Yes.
plays into this also, not only just
And it gets
Medicare and
back to earlier
Medicaid, but
conversation.
insurance.
There's contractual allowances that are allowed on those, such as Medicaid and the private insurance side as well.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Dodd.
You know me, I'll just open right up, but here's my concern. My concern is that the Wayne Net is competing for that service here in Wayne County with another company, Johnson Ambulance Service. I'll just mention it. And it appears to me, in fact, I was out on Wayne Memorial last week, and I saw 7 Johnson Ambulance Service, and I saw no Wayne Nets. Now, that concerns me greatly because the Wayne Net transport actually would help offset some of our costs for providing emergency EMS service. And it just concerns me, and I think we need to look into that, because it's hard for a government entity to compete against the private, in that the private can offer gifts and dollars and bonuses and things like that in order to procure that business. But yet, we are handicapped in that we cannot do so. I know in serving on the hospital board, we ran into this and had conversation over that. You know, on that board, I had to have conversation. At any rate,
I can't.
Do it. You can't imagine. I had some controversy there, but my concern is that Wayne County and this board controls who provides that service in Wayne County. And I think as such, we need to take a hard look at that. Because we have to allow Johnson Ambulance Service or any other service to operate here in Wayne County by board action. So I think we need to look at it as to how we can structure it to where Johnson Ambulance Service can survive, but at the same time, we are not disadvantaged from competing with them for that service. Thank you,
But,
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, let me ask this
Mr. Martin.
question. When you say they are competing, if they're competing positively, that means that they're charging, and they may be charging less than that $8.50 per loaded mile.
Oh, now, I don't know that.
Well, I mean, what will cause them to be able to compete positively with I mean, I know you said they may be giving gifts, but do you mean to get the contract with, say, company ABC or hospital ABC or service ABC to initially get the,
All right, I'm just saying it puts us at a disadvantage without getting into it too much.
okay?
But, Mr. Bell,
Mr. Attorney, didn't we discuss this once before when we were setting up Wayne about Johnston? And I don't remember the exact discussion. Maybe Mr. Gurley remember what the discussion was between Wayne and Johnston Ambulance Services.
Was, excuse me, I think you were saying that anybody who was going to provide services now have to go back and look at some notes, but was going to have the same quality of service that we were providing.
Right, I know. Okay.
You're franchising. They are just written to the plan, there is no franchise. There is no franchise, okay.
and I think one thing we've got to keep in mind also is there's a need for both our Wayne Net and for the private sector, because there's no way at this point that we could come close to even touching the need for the service of the private industry. It would, if we wanted to do all of that service, that would probably be the largest department in the county. So, I mean, there is a need for both. I mean, there's room for the private industry and for Wayne County to be involved. That's in my limited experience, but, that's, like the man from Food Line, that's my 2 cents worth.
But what I can see though, Mr. Chairman, Johnson Ambulance does a lot of transferring from nursing homes and nursing facilities to the hospital and back. I see that just about every nursing home that I go to. So I don't know if they found a niche of where they, feel comfortable with. I don't know. I don't know what their total business is.
I'm not sure either.
Yeah.
We can take a look at that. I've got it down here.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else anybody's got on non-emergency medical transport? Okay, the Jetport is next. The airport, I've given you a little bit of a write-up there, just in case some of you didn't know all the details of our airport. It is a 5,500 linear foot runway, and that's a standard runway length. If you can accommodate most, if not all, commercial jet traffic. So, it's not substandard at all. That's a standard runway length. We have a ILS approach on runway 230 and a GPS approach on runway 50. We also have an AWAS. Just a little history, it was an independent authority until 2009, and then it became a county department with an airport advisory board. There's 4 employees, a full-time airport manager, an operations manager, and then a 30-hour per week and a 20-hour per week line technician. So you've got 2 full-time, one with the 30 hours a week is considered full-time, and then the part-time at 20 hours. Then I've given you a list of how they make their money. I've given you a list of the hangars, the hangar buildings. We also have a privately owned aircraft maintenance building and flight school. And then we also house Wayne Community College's aviation-related courses. If you've not been out there, it'd be worth taking a trip out there to see the airport. Major capital improvements at the airport, just so you know, is most of them are 90-10 grants. They're Federal Aviation Administration grants. They pass through to the State Department of Transportation, their aviation division. And then, so we have to basically match 10% and they pay 90%. So much of the improvements out of the airport really haven't cost the county that much money through the years. Occasionally, some are only paid 50-50, I think like on terminal buildings and things like that. Typically, they'll do 50-50. So they're pre-planned and placed upon the state's aviation improvement plan, just like road projects are, and then you're able to get those done. I just want to stress that a general aviation airport is a vital component of economic development recruitment efforts. It makes a big difference in recruiting whether or not you have a quality airport or not. The one other thing is that aircraft are taxed based on the situs of the airplane, not where the owner lives. So if you live in Kinston, but you base your plane at Wayne Jetport, that plane is taxed in Wayne County. So it makes a difference if we can attract more planes to the airport because every one of those is tax-based in addition to the jet fuel and aviation fuel sales and the rental of the hangars. And we subsidize the airport about, I believe it's $42,000 a year out of the general fund, is that right? No, it's, yeah, $40,173. The reason I'm bringing that up is it's probably almost self-sufficient. I didn't have time to look at it, but if you count, you know, the property taxes just come in as part of the general fund property taxes, but if you were to take the airplanes that are based there and do the assessed valuation on that times the tax rate, it would be interesting to see what that generates. Because if it generates more than $40,000, then basically it's self-sufficient. Because if the airport weren't there, you wouldn't have that tax base coming in from those planes. But we don't transfer a dollar for dollar. And again, I didn't have time during this limited time I had to do this budget to do that, but that is something I think worth looking at. And I've done it in other jurisdictions just to see if in fact it is self-supporting or not. So Pam, would you make a note of that?
Yes.
And we'll try to get those numbers for you.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Gomes.
the only comment that I've heard on the airport is, for some reason, there's some question as to whether or not there are leases signed on all of these hangars and buildings and so forth out there. Have we heard anything on that?
My understanding is they've been prepared. I think we're waiting to execute them.
Some of them were, and some of them were carried over when the county, that continued to be effective when the county took over the airport.
So even though they're, in other words, when we assume, the counties assumed it, we assumed the leases as well, which.
But I'm not sure that all of them have been renewed.
So we are doing
I'll
some
try to-
studying to make sure that we've got the proper documentation on
Yes.
leases there. And the other thing was evidently the access to the airport lounge after hours or something like that. There was some question on whether or not, but you all are looking at that as well.
That's a
That's in the
project.
process.
That's in the process.
And that's a project. We've got
That's a
we've got to
project.
do some
That's correct.
construction in there to where we can structure it that way.
Okay, sure.
But I think, and I can't recall, has that been approved or not?
Yes, that's inside this current year budget
Yeah.
between the airport and what Milford has. There's about
Okay.
3 sets to it, it's the cabinetry. There's, sorry. That 24-hour access is in process now, a project of airport money and Milford Smith's money, facility services. And there's some cabinetry's got to be done, what we call storefront, which is the glass part, which allows access, and then, of course, the security network of tying in the doors.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's where we're at. The last two funds are internal funds. They're workers' compensation, self-insurance fund. I think we talked about that before. I've given you a write-up here on it. The county is a self-insurer on workers' comp. In other words, instead of paying the premium to a insurance company, we basically set the premiums and set it aside in this fund, and then we hire a firm, which in this case is Key Risk of Greensboro, who specializes in workers' comp insurance claims issues. They handle all the claims for us and administer the plan for us. We pay them a fee for that. And then we have a specific stop-loss limit is $350,000 on any individual claim. So above that, then the reinsurance kicks in on that. Each department, you'll see as you go through the budgets, each department having personnel is budgeted for premium. So when you see workers' comp in their budgets, that money is then taken over 1/12 each month and put into this fund. And that becomes the revenue source for this fund. And then the claims and the administrative fee and everything are paid out of this. We believe that in recent years, they've been $45.83 a month. We believe we can drop that down to $40 per employee per month. So that's a difference of $550 a year down to $480 a year. And so you'll see most of the workers' comp line items have actually decreased. That's why. It's not that they got less people, it's that the premium is less for this year. That's basically it on the workers' comp. The last fund, next to last fund, excuse me, the other self-insurance fund is hospitalization. I think we've covered quite a bit of that as we were going through it earlier. But basically, we hire Blue Cross Blue Shield to be the third-party administrator on a self-insured plan. We have a specific stop loss of $100,000, and if you remember when we discussed it at the most recent meeting, I'm recommending that you drop the aggregate stop loss, and that saved us about $47,000 a year, and you agreed to that at the last meeting. The county offers employees the opportunity to payroll deduct in a flexible spending account to cover their medical, which is up to $3,300 they can deduct, and childcare expenses up to $5,000. Those limits are not set by us; those are set by federal regulations because they limit how much you can do because it's an IRS tax break.
Commissioner Martin.
And that's so that the person doesn't have to pay taxes on that money before they use it.
That's correct. That's the benefit to them. So like if they were in a 25% tax bracket, if you set aside $5,000 for daycare and all that, it can save you $1,250, basically.
Are our employees, when we hire new employees and the present employees, have they or are they being educated on this?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And all of this is part of the enrollment every year too, as far as the hospitalization plan. So all the options are explained as well as these types of benefits as well. And as I said, you've got an 80-20 PPO plan and a 90-10 HSA plan. I recommended that you raise that to $750 from a $500 for the HSA, and I believe that was approved at the last meeting. We had been budgeting $600 per month, but we were able to decrease that by 6% to $565 per month. In addition, whatever the employee is to pay in, we've decreased that by 6% as well. And the opt-out provision remained the same, that we would give them $500 if they opted out of our insurance and went on their spouse's insurance, because there's a significant savings to us. As you can see, we're paying $550 a month. So if they opt out for $500 one-time payment, that's a significant savings to us.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Darn.
And I kind of wondered why we wouldn't want to increase that. Why would we want to leave that at 500?
Well,
rather-
we discussed that because most people who are eligible to do it, we think have done it. But if you want to look at that, we can do that.
Well, I'm just saying that if coverage was available from the state from a spouse, as an example, you might want to keep both plans and not opt out. But if there was an incentive of maybe $1,000, as an example, to opt out, then I might take you up on it. But I don't know that 500 would be enough incentive
To do that.
to do that.
Well, that's something y'all may want to consider.
So I'd like you-
We discussed it among ourselves about whether to take it up. It's been, I don't know how long it's been 500, do you, Pam?
20 years.
Many years.
Many years, okay. Well, we may want to look at that. Let me look at the
Yeah,
numbers
okay.
of how many people.
I'd appreciate it.
Okay. Will you make a note of that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The last page, and we've already been through this when I went through the chart with you, and these are the new numbers, but I think this is a good chart. It shows you where your employees are participating in what plan. And it gives you the percentage that the county pays and then what the employee pays. Of course, on the employee only, the county pays that 100%. On the employee and child, you'll notice the county continues to pay the $565 per month. So basically, any dependent coverage is paid by the employee. Okay? And then you see the blended rate. What that means is on employee child, it's 75-25. Employee and children is 68 and 32. Employee and spouse is 65 and 35. And full family coverage is 55 and 45. Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Darn.
Last year, during our presentation of our auditors, it had indicated that there were, I forget the terminology used, but there were a number of individuals that were receiving benefits that were not entitled to them. And I would ask that you review that.
Okay.
I don't know if they were speaking of dependents that were, I don't know where that was, but I'd appreciate if you check into that.
Yeah. All right. So that's it on the health insurance, unless anybody has any questions there. Law enforcement separation allowance, I've had several of you ask me what exactly that was for and what were the rules of it. So I've given you this write-up on it. It's North Carolina General Statute 143, 166.42. This requires the county to pay annually a special separation allowance to retiring law enforcement officers. This fund covers the revenues and expenditures to provide that allowance. And when we say law enforcement officers, that means that they're sworn, certified with powers of arrest. That's how they define it. You take their last salary, you multiply it by 0.85%, multiply it by the number of years of credible service. That's the separation allowance. All right. This special separation allowance is payable to all officers who have completed 30 or more years of credible service or have attained the age of 55 with 5 or more years of credible service, and they've not attained age 62 and have completed at least 5 years of continuous service as a law enforcement officer immediately before service retirement. So what that means is, just before retirement, they had to have been a law enforcement officer. They have to have done that for at least 5 years. They have to be at least 55 with 5 years, with 5 or more years of service, or at any age with 30 years of service. So what that means is someone could start at 21, 30 years of service would be 51. So they could get it at 51. They would stay on and get this till 62. The theory behind this is that if they retire early, it's helping them because they no longer, they don't qualify for Social Security yet. That's why age 62 is in there. So does everybody understand how that works? So in case of the benefit ceases, the last paragraph, the benefit ceases upon the death of the officer, the last day of the month in which the officer attains 62 years of age, or the first day of reemployment by a local government employer in any capacity that requires participation in the retirement system. Okay? So that's basically how it operates. And so what we do is we set that money aside annually to pay that separation allowance. So basically, this is payments that are made to people who have, law enforcement officers who have retired and are not yet 62, and that worked with us for at least, worked as a law enforcement officer at least 5 years and age 55. Does anybody have any questions on that?
All right, that's just for my information. Say, I'm just gonna use for an example, a highway patrolman retires after, 20 years with the state.
Mm-hmm.
Then gets a job with us as a deputy or whatever, which is fine because we don't have to train them. They're
That's right.
well qualified. But does that 20 years from the state, are we responsible for that, or is the state responsible for it?
Well, he would have retired from them, so he would get that. I don't believe it's cumulative, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I'd have to get a ruling from the state on that, because I can't answer that question.
Okay.
But my guess is he would not be eligible for it for those 20 years because he's already been compensated for that with the state. Now, the advantage to us of hiring those folks is they get to keep their retirement because they were in the state employees retirement system and we're a local government employees retirement system. But I don't know the answer to your question, Wayne.
Okay.
But from what I'm reading here, if he's less than 62, he's had 5 years of service with the county. Once he obtains 5 years of service, and he's less than 62 years of age, he would be.
He would get it up until
to
age 62.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay.
The last thing I'd like to go over with you briefly, because you've not had this before, under the appendix, I wanted you to see this, because this will come into play as we're planning our major projects and how we're going to finance them. And I asked Pam to split this up in 2 or 3 different categories, but we would aggregate it when we look at our total debt service. But under non-school county debt, in other words, that's all county debt except for schools, you only have one installment financing of $9,493,000 that you did in 2012. And you'll notice the dates are it's paid off October 1 of 2018 with an interest rate of 1.63%. You see the principal payments there. You'll see that they gradually go down. And then you have interest payments that also are declining. And you'll see that if you ask, well, how much of that debt is still outstanding, if you go to the far right and see the totals column, you'll see that the principal that's left to be repaid is $6,511,000. So out of that $9,493,000, we've already paid off the difference between those two numbers. So what's owed is $6,511,000. But what the important part is that as we're planning these projects, you can see that you're paying $1,539,000 right now. But in 5 more years, that'll be paid off. So you have some debt service capacity sitting out there 5 years out. And actually, 4 years from now, it's declined by almost $400,000, well, a little over $400,000 there. So what you do as we go to do this planning is we'll take all that into account, okay? So that's one piece of good news, because you need to look at your debt service schedules, obviously, to see what you can afford to do and when you can afford to do it. So wanted to give you that. The schools, excuse me, this is the economic development purposes. This is the Eastern Region money. And remember, some of this will be repaid by some other entities, depending on who borrows the money. But these are all new at what we will be borrowing there. And so we wanted to make you aware of that and that amount of money, and that it will take some additional amounts there, okay? Now, what you'll see at the bottom, she's only put the $115,000 because she's got authorized but unissued. That's the two we're getting ready to do in June. But because we're gonna do them in June, we wanted to show them to you on here, all right? Then you have a debt service / sinking fund repayment and funding schedule for the Wayne County Board of Education. And what you see there is you have that QSCAB of $15 million, which was done in 2012. Now, this is actually pretty interesting, and I'm going to let Pam explain about the interest rate and why we're calling it a sinking fund instead of a debt service payment. So, Pam, if you can go over that, please.
Okay, I'll be glad to. Okay, with this is the qualified school construction bonds, and our annual, it's not actually a principal payment, it's a transfer of cash from our main cash account to a sinking fund account annually, that we accumulate these dollars over 14 years, and at the end of the 14 years, we pay off the $15 million. So the cash is actually showing up on our balance sheet in gross. So each year that we have $1,071,000, we actually put it into a sinking fund that the county actually keeps on their balance sheet as a cash sinking fund account. The $1,071,428 is reimbursed from lottery funds each year from the schools. They take that out of the gross lottery funds they receive each year. And the interest is reimbursed as a federal subsidy each year by the federal government. So it's that is not at 100% anymore. I think it's around 93% or something like that, and that's being reimbursed by the federal. So it's virtually costing the county hardly anything for this loan. But we will pay this in a lump sum payment after 14 years on October 1, 2025. You will see it in your notes in your audit as restricted funds for QSCAPs. It's part of your restricted fund balance.
And you're gonna see that grow by $1,071,428 every year. But I wanna point that out to you because that sinking fund needs to be kind of sacred. You don't wanna be dipping into that. Because at the end of 15 years, you gotta have the $15 million sitting there.
Sounds like only the government could come up with something like this.
It is.
Let
It's a
me make sure
federal-
I'm understanding. We are just basically taking $1,071,428 and putting it into a separate fund.
A separate cash account, not a fund. But to cover the county, to make sure we have the funds available, I actually budget for it every year.
Well,
It's not a true budgeted line item, it's a balance sheet line item, but we budget for it, just to make sure that we have the funds available to move the cash.
But so that I can understand it, we're taking the money and setting it aside so that in 15 years, we're gonna be able to write a check for the entire $15 million.
That's correct.
Is that correct? Now, is the interest being paid annually?
Yes, sir.
Are we-
Semi-annually.
Okay, but we're paying it, but we're being reimbursed at a rate of about 93, 97%,
Right.
something like that.
Right, from the federal government.
From the federal
You'll
government.
see that as a revenue coming in.
But actually, all of these are actually school funds.
Yes, they are.
It's lottery money.
It's lottery money, right?
So out of the gross lottery money they receive each year, the first dollars that come out of that is this $1,071,000. The remaining dollars they have committed to help fund the annual debt payments on this next amount of money that we're borrowing.
And even though we are a guarantor, I'm gonna say a guarantor, that if the monies are not coming from the state, only in that case would the county be responsible to make those payments.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
Yeah, you
Now-
got it, you got it.
So really and truly, would you count that as an obligation?
Well, it's an obligation in the sense that it's a long-term obligation that at the end of 13 more years, you better have $15 million in there.
Agreed. But I assume we're getting 1,071,000 set aside
We are.
from the schools.
We are.
We are.
But
That's,
what,
well, that's why when she budgets, she'll show the money coming in, but she'll also show the expenditure. But we wanted to make clear to you that you understood how this one worked, because this is unusual.
well,
And
we
this is
definitely don't
something-
wanna use their money, is that for sure?
Well, it's a separate banking account. It's a sinking fund, with cash in it. The way we control it is we control it through the restrictions in the fund balance.
So the federal government did not want their monies, but at one time,
Correct, in the 14 years.
okay.
Is that clear?
One pay, well, yes, I hope everybody else, that's clear to them as well. It's clear as mud.
But you've got it down. What you described is accurate. That's how it operates. But we wanted to go over that with you so that everybody fully understood that. Because you're going to see, and as Pam said, it won't increase your fund balance because it'll show as more cash, but down below under liability, as a restriction. It's a restriction, so it won't increase your fund balance because it's already spoken for.
And while we're talking about this, as we are now putting additional debt on our books in regards to the two schools, it really needs to have an asterisk out to the side, and that is that even though it is our debt, it's actually the school board's debt.
That's why I like to set them up in two different schedules, because I like to highlight for the public how much is actually for county purposes and how much is actually for school purposes. Because what you're going to find is through the years is the overwhelming majority of your debt will be school-related.
Well, agreed, but we all recognize that we've got some major projects
That's
that
right.
we're about to hit with, and I'm hoping that those obligations of the schools are not going to be negatively impacting our ability to borrow dollars.
Well, I'll
and-
say
and its
this,
interest rate.
your level of debt is low relative to other counties. And the reason for that is you don't have the level of debt for schools that a lot of places have. And a lot of places have recently built jails. And of course, both of those things are fixing to change in Wayne County.
Right.
So you're going to see your debt service go up. But I want to put your mind at ease as far as bond rating agencies and everything. What you're looking at is not viewed as excessive. You're just lower than normal right now. But, so as we take our debt up, it will increase, but it won't be viewed as unusual by bond rating agents.
But those two schools are gonna show up as our debt. even
Yes,
though
they are.
That's right.
Yes, they are. So if, for instance, if we borrow $36 to $38 million, that $38 million debt will be added to this debt service
Right.
schedule. That's correct, John.
With their, on a balance sheet, generally you got the asset that also counteracts
Well,
that.
that's
Is
the
that
screwy
correct?
thing in North Carolina, and I've argued about this for years. Actually, we'll be okay because of the way we're setting it up. you're technically gonna be the owner.
That's correct.
And so you will show the asset on there. But if you had not set it up that way, the schools would actually have the asset on their books,
With the
and you would
debt.
get the debt. And that makes you look like you're in worse shape, that you don't have an asset offsetting what you bought. And typically, you'll have a statement in your audit to that effect, but because we've set and I think you set this one up the same way, we technically own the asset.
That's correct. Either Q-SCAP, is that what y'all call it?
That's what these are.
Yeah, or is even set up the same way?
Right.
Okay.
And that was the government also, at the time they did this, promised you that they would reimburse you 100% of the interest.
Yeah.
And they,
I noticed that they're not.
Well, they hit sequestration and that's one of the areas they hit. That's why a lot of folks won't go into something long-term with the federal government because they change the rules all the time. So given the choice between a 20-year vanilla type bond or a promise that the federal government will reimburse you, you know, not most people, but some people will walk away from it. However, if you look at that interest rate, it's still awfully good because at 4.33 and you're not paying 93% of that, the interest rate's just too good.
Yeah.
So you made a good decision. It's just frustrating that they give you something and then they start whittling away at it. The only other thing, and we don't really need to go over that, we put a glossary of terms in the back, so if you hit a term you're not familiar with, you might want to check back there. And those are done primarily from some resources by the Government Finance Officers Association, and out of some of the publications they do. But essentially, that's the 21 funds that make up the budget. And I guess at this point, Mr. Chairman, if y'all would like to schedule a work session, then we need to consider doing that. And again, we can do that anytime up to June 17th when you're scheduled to vote on this.
What's the pleasure of the board?
I have another question.
Well, ask your
Oh, I'm
question,
sorry.
then we'll.
Okay.
I just wanted to back up on something. I just happened to think about, talking about airport funding. About 3-4 months ago, maybe 5 months ago, the Mount Olive Airport, the county only owns a short piece of runway at the Mount Olive Airport, and it was suggested that we convey that to Mount Olive. And I was wondering what happened to that. Plus, the liability, by the way, on this county, just having that short piece of runway is tremendous. And so, but here's the key, is that we still can make, I want to make sure that people in Mount Olive know that we're still planning on making that contribution of 40,000 or so per year.
I think it's 30-something, yeah.
38, somewhere
Yeah.
along in there, to the Mount Olive Airport. The key is that the county needs to not have the liability that's involved on that short runway. And I was just wondering if anything has ever taken place on that. Has there been any discussion on that line? Mr. Parker, is any discussion or anything?
I haven't had any. One thing that I've asked, not recently, but in the past, to get the agreement that was made supposedly between the town of Mount Olive and Wayne County with the federal government when they started getting some loans, and I've never been able to get anybody to give me that agreement.
Okay.
The county does not have a copy of it.
So we'll try to get with Charles Brown, see if we can get a copy of that,
Yeah.
and then start a discussion on that.
And don't forget to talk about the electric bill as well.
Right, got that on my list too. I don't disagree with anything you said. I think you ought to get out of the liability of it. I think it should be under them. But you can still make a contribution because if nothing more, it's for economic development,
That's correct.
you know, so.
Yes, sir.
But I agree, we ought to be out from under that. I was not aware you owned part of it.
It's just a short section, I believe, Mr. Parker. We had a map at one time,
That's right.
and, so,
How much,
And I think that section's in the middle, because I think it was added on to the to the end of the runway at one time, and now
Yeah.
they've added on to it again,
So
so.
just where everybody lands, that's where we own.
Yeah, okay.
see, keep in mind now, just as a matter of remembering that Mount Olive owns that airport down there, which is different than what we have here. The county owns the
Right,
jetport.
right.
But that's neither here nor there. It's still good for economic development. So, I just feel like that we, as a county, that short piece of that runway, we just don't need the liability of it. That's the only reason I'm bringing it up.
Good point.
well, I
Anyone
would
else
just-
got any questions?
I would just like, just for clarity and for my, what, when you say, Mr. Mayo, that you don't think the county needs to have responsibility for that portion of it, did I understand that we have the responsibility for the jet port?
We do have responsibility for the jetport because we're the owner, and so you carry the insurance. The town, as the owner of the Mount Olive Airport, would have to carry airport insurance. I think Ray's point is that would require us to possibly also carry, because we have a very small part of it.
Well,
Because in a lawsuit, and I'll let the attorney address that, but I mean, basically, they start with the premise of cast a wide net. Would that be a fair statement?
That's fair.
And
You've
you're,
dealt with attorneys before, huh?
oh, yeah. So I think that's the concern, Ed, and there's no reason to have double insurance on it, is let the town handle the liability for that airport. We'll continue to make a financial contribution to
Well, I was just wondering if it was, and that's why I was getting at the insurance part. I was just wondering if it was prorated now. You know, I heard you say that the county owns a small portion of the runway,
yeah.
and I was just wondering if it was prorated now, or were we unnecessarily paying
I
double
can't answer
insurance and
that.
just
We,
prorated?
my understanding is, Pam, correct me if I'm wrong, is we just have one line item in our budget that says a contribution to the Mount Olive Airport, something like that.
Oh, that's true.
And so that's, to my knowledge, that's all we're doing. I don't know that we specify what that's to cover. I think that's just an annual, contribution you've made, and we would continue to make.
Just get with Mr. Brown, the city manager, and see, and work out the details.
Right.
and-
Yeah.
And really find out what the answers are. I mean, not necessarily work out the details, but
right.
find out, where we do stand and.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And just come back to us.
Yeah.
We'll do
Okay.
a work session or something, just to see what that day is.
Anyone else got any questions? What's the pleasure of the board, on setting a date for a work session, if if that is the pleasure of the board?
I would like to establish one, but I'm not sure what date.
Let's look at the dates.
You remember, you have the budget, what do you call it? The public hearing. The public hearing is on June 3rd. What I typically like to do, unless y'all disagree, is I like to try to have a work session or so before that. Because then you've pretty much ironed out any issues that we've got, or the follow-up questions that you've asked, and I think you've given us a list of probably around 15 things that we need to follow up with information for you on. But you can hold it any time until you vote on it. That's the only critical day.
Maybe we should find out if anyone have any issues with the budget right now as presented.
And I don't have a problem with that, you know. Do you have to have another public hearing
No, sir.
Yes,
afterwards?
No.
just one.
You only hold one, and that's to get public input, and you don't have to have had your work sessions before that. I just like to do it because then we pretty much know pretty close where we're at, or if you've got, or we know that certain things are still under review, you know, that you haven't made a final decision on them yet. But at least you zeroed in on where any points of disagreement may be.
Let me just make this suggestion. Maybe, we could have it after the public hearing, if somebody come up and
And
bring up
raise
some
something.
things that
That's a
we need
good
to get back
point.
together.
That's a good point.
Discuss.
That's exactly what I was gonna say, Joe.
That's a good point. And remember, I think I mentioned this at the last meeting, you do have the letter from East Point where they're requesting something, and we have played phone tag through the holidays. He called me on Friday, I called him on Saturday, and so I'm getting ready to write him an email requesting additional information.
I'm going to the meeting this afternoon, so if you need
Okay.
me to tell them anything, I will.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, what type of, how lengthy is our agenda coming up on the third?
I have no idea.
Well,
We don't have an
Marcia
agenda.
says it's not very lengthy at all, so you might want to hold your work session after that meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I'd prefer to go ahead and have that afternoon and get it all over with.
Yes.
Okay. So you could do, and that would allow you to do what John is saying.
That's
is
correct.
Let's get the
Hear from the
input
public.
from the public, and then you could have your work session and see what's left to go over. In the meantime, the only other thing I would say is, as you read through, and a couple of you have already done that, if you have any questions on it, please don't hesitate to call me. And I'll be happy to go over any part of it with you. And some of them I may have to delve into my files to answer, but we should be able to get you an answer on anything you ask about it.
Sounds good to me.
Sounds-
The only other thing I would ask is, did you find this format more readable for you?
Yes, sir.
Well, I think you saved about, 20 hours?
Well,
I do. I personally want to thank you because I actually, over the weekend, went through this. And
I know you did,
I-
based on the
because
call, you definitely went through it.
but it's understandable. It's something that you can follow. And if you've got questions, you know how to ask them intelligently. Whereas before, it's like shooting in the dark. So I applaud you for it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, when I first came on the board, I was talking to Pam earlier. Actually, when you go through, it's like a 2 or 3 hour training on how to read the budget. I actually came up here and sat down. So this is much more user friendly. I like the way it's laid out. If I can understand it, anybody should be able to understand it.
Well, and one of the reasons we do that too, I mean, it's primarily for you, but also so a citizen can read it and see what they've got. I do want to tell you that the copy is on the website now, and we're also putting them in the Goldsboro Library and also in Mount Olive's Library. And we have one at the clerk's office, which is a legal requirement. So if anybody wants to come to the clerk's office, there's one here. But the entire budget is online.
Can we get a copy at Pikeville and Fremont, their libraries as well?
Yes, we can. We'll just have to make a couple more. But Janice, can you take care of that?
They're ready.
They're ready? Okay, so we'll get them up there as
Great,
well.
great.
And also, copies has been given to the press.
Yes, we did that.
And all the country stores.
I don't know if we can handle that, but
They can solve the issues with the budget.
I don't even stop at the country stores anymore.
So you don't need to stop there anymore, you never get away.
I don't have time. Anyone else have anything?
Motion to adjourn.
We've got an agenda meeting after this one? Yes, sir.
Who's supposed to be at that agenda meeting?
Yeah, for next.
it's short for the next, for June
Am I the
3rd.
next one in line? Okay.
You're the next one in line.
All right. I won't rush out then.
And then if you want to go out to eat, we'll certainly do that.
Before the meeting.
Yeah, y'all wanna do that first?
Oh,
It'd be fine with me if y'all wanna go to lunch.
I'll do it.
Yes.
Do I need a motion that we go have lunch and then come back for the agenda meeting? Or do I have the authority to make that call?
Yes, sir, that's your call.
That's your call.
Okay, let's go have lunch and then come back for the agenda meeting, if that's all right with, Mr. Doherty, Mr. Marty. Okay, I'll go have, let's go eat lunch and then come back.
You just won't come back, huh?